Hello, everybody, and welcome in to the Autzen Audibles podcast. I am your host, Jared Mack, and with me, as always, this little Wednesday edition is Erik Skopil. Erik, how are we doing today?
Such a weird day. So much rain.
Yep,
Like,
a lot of rain, dark, gloomy, just a real, honestly, gross day.
yeah, practice was like I thought it was going to be inside because it was pouring, and then Dan wanted to practice in the elements, and they did, but it still meant we were wearing rain jackets for the first time in fall, which is kind of new.
Yeah, I had kind of forgotten how much these type of rainy days stink, and I'm sorry that we're starting the podcast by belaboring a point. We live in Oregon, we should be expected to this, but
Yeah.
it does kind of stink because the last 4 months have been, I don't know, pretty perfect here. So, but it is the fall, and we're very happy about that. And with the fall, usually comes, Oregon State matchups in November. However, this year, for the first time since 1894, I believe,
Ooh.
Oregon will be playing Oregon State in the month of September. That's right. This weekend, September 14th, Oregon will be playing at Oregon State starting at 12:30 on Fox. And we are here to kind of discuss the game a little bit, go over some injury storylines that we have, and just kind of go through some keys of the game. So why don't we start off with some injuries? And how about we want to go with Matthew Bedford first? Does that sound good?
He's the name of the hour, right? Like, he's the guy everybody wants to know about, and I've been encouraged, as I think you probably have, Jared, of last week. We should know, he's been out for about a month now with what I believe is a right knee injury. And he made an appearance about 2 weeks ago that we didn't expect, but was kind of not doing a whole lot. It was kind of like, okay, he's here, but sometimes you see this happen. A veteran guy wants to be around, and he's just kind of around. But this week, he's been doing everything. He's been doing they've done their offensive line, defensive line pod drill, which is a little bit of, it's a full blocking drill. And he's been working at right guard, doing some stuff there. And when they've done their sled work or their work under the chute, he's been doing that. And he seems to be moving around pretty well. So I don't know if he'll play. I asked Dan if he was confident he'd play. He said he was confident he could play.
Yeah, whatever that means.
We'll see on Saturday, but I think I'm more optimistic this week than last week, and that's probably obvious because more time has passed. But just in terms of what we've actually seen, it feels like a guy who's getting closer to playing.
Yeah, we've seen him hit other people. We've seen him do more offensive line things other than just kind of taking dry hacks in the line, which is really, it's a really positive sign. I think this is probably still part of the plan, is to not play him this week, get him through the bye. I've been told that the goal is to get him ready by the bye week, or to get him the week after the bye, for that first game against UCLA. So this kind of falls in line, but it is really good to see him starting to do real football things, because he's, like you said, he's been out there, but he hasn't been doing much. He's been doing more than what we do during practice in terms of physical football things. But as for an offensive line, he's just kind of going through the motions, which is fine because, again, when he first got injured, Dan was like, well, we hope we get him to play at some point in the year. And it's like, oh boy, that sounds bad. But if it comes this week, if it comes in 2 weeks against UCLA, either or, I think is really positive for Oregon's offensive line. I don't think it'll be, I don't think it'll fix everything magically. He won't be like a wizard here, but I think it should help some things, because that was the starting unit. He was part of the starting unit that they went through 3 weeks of fall camp with, or 2.5 or 3 weeks of fall camp with. So he should have some continuity, but it'll take him time to get back into game shape and everything. So, and it would have been nice, maybe the last 2 weeks, if Oregon had won by a lot, maybe they would have gotten him in there just for, just to kind of get him back up to game speed. But as we know, that didn't happen.
Yeah, and I just say temper expectations, whether it's this week or 2 weeks, like Jared suggested, with what you expect from him. I think it's become really easy to be like, oh, once Bedford gets back, and even Dan has kind of talked, not that they'll be perfect, but things are going to be kind of up in the air until players get healthy. He said that on Monday. I wouldn't expect this to be look like a Joe Moore Award finalist offensive line again the moment he's healthy. So I would expect improved play. I think it's going to make some of the decisions of where players fit make maybe a little easier, maybe streamline some of like, okay, well, if you solidified at right guard, then Nishad Strother's just not in this rotation, and Harper's playing left guard, and then whatever center you like best is at center. I might do some of that, but I don't think this is like oh my gosh, a light switch has been flipped, and now suddenly they're amazing again. But positive, I think, signs in terms of his return, and I do think it's possible this week, and then certainly, like, if he doesn't play this week, I would be stunned if after the bye, based upon this development, he's not at least available to play against UCLA.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Let's move on to the next injury news. Do you want to go over with Gary Bryant and just kind of what's been weirdly going on there?
Yeah, I thought we would see Gary Bryant do this week what Matthew Bedford's done, which is just get closer and do more things in practice. And yet he's been completely absent now for 2 straight days. Didn't see him at all coming in. Didn't see him during our 20 minutes. Didn't see him exiting practice, which sometimes we see. Like, we should know, like on Tuesday, we weren't able to identify Dylan Williams, one of the freshman linebackers, but after practice, we saw him leaving. And it's like, okay, well, we must have missed him. He clearly was at least working in some capacity. With Gary, it's like, I just don't think he's been at practice the last 2 days from everything we've seen. And that's certainly like, well, he's not playing this weekend against Oregon State if he's not practicing. And then you start wondering, like, well, did he re-aggravate whatever the injury is? Is something else going on? Like, is he away from the team right now? Like, is this a long-term situation where he won't be around? You don't know. That's all, kind of asking questions that we don't have answers to, but it is interesting. This is a guy who looked like he was getting closer to playing, and now he's not even practicing.
Yeah, I mean, he went through the warm-up period during Saturday's game against Boise State. He was in uniform the whole time. He was on the sideline, obviously didn't play. And the week of Boise State, he did practice. And on the Wednesday that we were able to watch, he was what looked like a full participant, at least with returning punts and during that practice, and looked pretty good. I mean, it's always hard to tell like how healthy somebody is when they're returning punts, because it's like they're just kind of going through the motions at that point, getting reps in. They're not doing it game speed, obviously. But I think at the very least, it is certainly surprising that we just haven't seen him. Like, sometimes there are days where a player will miss it, and then we will see them the next day. Like Jaleel Florence, we've not seen like on a Tuesday, and then he's there like in full pads and cleats on a Wednesday. And it's like, okay, well, whatever, something happened on Tuesday where he wasn't at practice. Maybe he was getting, more work done on whatever his injuries are. And this goes for all players where, well, we won't see him and then they'll be there the next day. And maybe that person is getting more PT work done, or just kind of going through training exercises rather than being on the field, and then they show up. Or it could be for, myriad of reasons why they aren't at practice one day. But for Gary, I think we just don't have the answer here. I think it's pretty surprising. But in Dan's and Oregon's past, like, if you're not practicing, if we don't see you on Tuesday and Wednesday, that doesn't exactly bring a ringing endorsement that you are going to be playing come Saturday, or every once in a while on a Friday. So
yeah,
if he's out there on Saturday, I think we would all be surprised.
I'm just saying he's out. I just don't think if you're not practicing Tuesday, if you're not even there on Tuesday and Wednesday, it's like, unless there's, again, who knows, maybe there's like a real obvious reason for something off the field, but I wouldn't expect to see him play. That would be my guess. And again, we'll see when he's back with the team, but it's been that part just kind of raises some eyebrows when he goes from being seemingly like pretty close to then just not being there. Just kind of an ideal. Don't have a whole lot of information additionally though.
I'm trying to think of other injury news that we can go over. I know that Autzen Porter, I don't think, has been at the last 2 practices. It's a bit tougher for those listening or watching, when Oregon begins to play real opponents and it's not just fall camps. They will have scout team numbers for guys, and usually guys lower on the totem pole. So it's a bit harder to keep track of who is there and who is not there. I don't think we've seen Autzen Porter the last 2 days. At least my eyes haven't. Just like Eric said with Dylan Williams, like, he clearly walked by us on the entrance to practice, but I honestly don't know what some of these guys look like without football helmets, because it's, you never really see their faces too often, especially like true freshmen. And that could be the same thing with Porter. I don't think it is because he's been in and out of practices with injuries. He's also been in and out of games where I don't think he suited up for Idaho, but did suit up for Boise State. So that's another injury name to know, I think, going into this week.
Yeah, and again, if he's not at practice, I don't think he'll be there. And there's been, and I can't verify this, but there's been some talk that there might have been something in the personal life that's kept him away from the team. But we'll let that either come to light or not. But I just don't think he's a player. And frankly, not to be critical, but this isn't a guy you expected to be very involved on Saturday anyway. But I don't think you'll see Autzen Porter, who's a player we like. We think he's a good.
I really like him. Yeah, he is like on Oregon's depth chart that they hand out during game days. He is second behind Birch in like the defensive end category, which is where I had him on my depth charts, like in the spring and the fall. But still, that's somebody who just we haven't seen, and like Erik said, if it's a personal matter, then that will just kind of come up eventually, and that's probably his reason as to why. But another one where we just don't have a lot of answers to, why is he not at practice? Debayuli, another guy we can talk about, I guess, if you want to. Kind of the same story with him. Still rehabbing from a toe injury, right? Broken toe or
he broke a foot. Broke a bone in his first metatarsal in his foot, I think is what he said back in. Yeah, I mean, this is very similar. Like Jaleel Florence, let's just group them together. There's really no shift in terms of what we've seen. Seems like Dave, every week since fall camp, is Tuesdays in trainers, Wednesdays in cleats. Read with it. I mean, that's probably like one of those days he's getting a little bit more work than the other. But until he's in cleats both days, and frankly, even when he's in cleats, he hasn't done a whole lot. Like the drill we talked about earlier with Bedford, where it was encouraging that he was actually blocking people, Iuli hasn't done that. So I think he remains a bit away, and I don't have a ton of information more because he was really optimistic about being available to start the season back at Oregon's media day. I mean, they made him available to speak to media. You don't do that with guys who are hurt and you think are out really very often. I guess they did that with Jaleel too. But Iuli seemed confident he was going to be able to play, and he hasn't been. And I just think that's unfortunate because this is a guy who would have been his year to maybe make a role, especially with some of the injuries and kind of what's fallen out at the offensive line, and he hasn't been able to take advantage because he's not been healthy. But yeah, I don't think he's somebody you expect for a bit either.
Yeah, I agree. We need to see him in actual practice, like actually taking reps in the offensive line drill and going through the motions, which again could be after the bye, but it'll take some time for him to just get back into football shape and football mindset and get hit again and all those other things. But he is a guy who, if he becomes healthy and mid-October, could certainly lend a helping hand with this offense and the offensive line rotations and be maybe the sixth man, whatever the case is. For Florence, he's been going through football activities the last week and a half, 2 weeks. So certainly, again, kind of like Bedford, encouraging signs. I don't think he didn't suit up against Boise State, obviously. So I don't really know where to put him because last week he went through mod bracket drills and like actually was physical and made contact. He's wearing cleats like the last 2 weeks. So just another guy to keep a name for. Again, Oregon with this bye week, Erik, I think you talked about this on one of the podcasts we've done recently, where the bye week seemed kind of at a rough time because it was earlier in the year. But with all these injuries and guys who are seemingly close to coming back, but might need an extra week, like this is a pretty good opportune time to have the bye. And maybe that's the case with Bedford. Maybe that's the case also with Florence. And again, it gives other guys who are dealing with injuries like Gary just more time to get back into football shape and get healthier. So, and again, you don't really heal during football season. Like you're playing football. Like when you have an injury, it's just about like just dealing with it. And a bye week is certainly going to help a lot of people heal up a little bit and then certainly get a better idea how to deal with it. So I don't know. We'll see.
Last thing on injuries, and we've already done 15 minutes, so I don't want to belabor it because I know there's listeners who want us to get to the point. I just think it's helpful, hopefully, for some to know kind of what status these guys are. I don't know what to make of Cam Alexander, who hasn't been on the injury report either week, but hasn't played at all. So that's a guy we thought was going to be a starting corner probably. So not a lot of clarity with either Florence or Alexander, two guys we thought would play a lot. And the corners have played great, so I'm not making a huge deal of it. Just kind of another interesting personnel thing to monitor.
Just something that's there. Like you said, Nico Reed and Dante Manning have really done well so far, opposite of Jabbar Muhammad. So it's not like they're dying to get one of these guys back or like they really need it. But yeah, Alexander's an interesting one because we've seen him practice and do everything.
He's missed no practice time the whole season. He's been at every practice
since the start of fall camp. He is not, and we've talked to him, and he's never really kind of alluded to the fact that he's injured or anything. The only thing that happened was Tosh Lupoy mentioning that he's like been banged up and gone through some stuff during fall camp, and it's like, oh, that's interesting. And then he doesn't play, and you're like, oh, all right, that's very interesting. So not a lot there with Cam, and I think that's it in terms of the injury list. Like obviously guys like Dakota Fields and Michael Gardner are probably going to miss most, if not all of the season, it looks like. So don't really need to talk about them, but we can move on, talk about this upcoming matchup between Oregon and Oregon State. Again, 12:30, September 14th on Fox. Do not have to sign up for any streaming service this week. So for those listening, congratulations. If you have cable or YouTube TV or whatever, you will be able to watch the game on a television without the help of any streaming service. So where do you want to jump in? What do we want to talk about first here?
Let's do some what to know about Oregon State. I know we had Jake on from Beaver Blitz for Tuesday. He did a little sit down with Matt and I, and we kind of ran through some of this Oregon State team. But and so I recommend go listen to that because he's going to be more in depth and more knowledgeable than we are on Oregon State personnel. Just understand that every week, the guest is going to know more about his team than we are about their team. That's just how it works. Right. Just like we know more about Oregon than they know about Oregon. So, but I think the thing that really stands out in looking at this is a completely different roster. Legitimately, I think Jake said 3 returning starters. Outside of that, there's 5 or 6 other guys that are back that played any kind of role the last couple of years. This is a team built on the portal, built on true freshman recruits, and is a completely new look team. Oregon and Oregon State didn't play that long ago. It was 10 months ago. You look through these rosters and they look completely differently. And that starts at quarterback. That starts at running back. That's, they're probably their most seasoned player, Joshua Gray, and it might be their best offensive player. Is the only offensive lineman who played a lot last year. And was an all Pac-12 player. So a very capable one, but you just look through it, it's a completely different team. And it's going to be really interesting, I think, just from a personnel perspective, because I really, and this is the same thing we felt going into Boise State, same thing we felt going in Idaho. Oregon has a much better team. Yep. The players that are starting for Oregon State in a lot of these spots are either guys that their quarterback was the starting quarterback at Idaho was a really good FCS quarterback, but that's a downgrade from DJ Uiagalelei probably in terms of at least the physical capabilities. I'm not very high on what we've seen from DJ at all in his college career. So if you want to convince me Giovanni McCoy is a better player, a better fit, you could do that. But I'm just saying there's a difference in talent there. The running backs, one of them was Colorado's second or third string back. The other was a guy who was at Ole Miss last year and I think carried the ball less than 10 times. So the receivers are former walk-ons and true freshmen. This is not a particularly talented team, but Oregon has had a heck of a time 2 consecutive weeks, again, with teams where we came on this podcast and said, well, Oregon has the talent advantage. Let's see if they can put it all together. And if they do, they should win pretty handily. And yet both games were competitive very late into the fourth quarter. So that's just kind of the debrief from my perspective of if you go look at the OSU roster, not a lot of firepower. They don't have a Damian Martinez. They don't have NFL players on the outside. I think they've got Joshua Gray, who will probably be an NFL offensive guard, who's kind of a key player there. But the offense is not, and they run the ball really, really effectively through 2 weeks. But I don't know how much of that is them and how much of that is Idaho State and San Diego State.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I don't think Idaho State and San Diego State are any good, especially San Diego State, who was pretty good last year, but has gone through, Brady Hoke retired and a lot of their guys had hit the transfer portal and went elsewhere. This team, offensively is going to be pretty darn similar to what it's been in years past. They're going to try to run the ball and use that, and then run play action passes, some RPOs off of that. I think Giovanni McCoy, the quarterback, is fine. I think he's a hell of an athlete, so he's going to have some of those moments. But he's averaging like 147 yards a game. He's not exactly asked to do a lot. Just like DJ Uyunglele wasn't asked to do a lot. Just like Ben Branson before him wasn't really asked to do a lot. Like they're going to lean heavily on their offensive line, which took a hit this week. Tyler Volton tore his ACL and MCL, so he's going to be out for the year. They're going to turn to, I think, a redshirt senior whose name isn't in front of me right now, so I don't remember it. But still, Joshua Gray is probably the most talented player on their entire team, and he's going to be, honestly, he could be like a day 1, day 2, probably more day 2 draft pick in the NFL. Like he's a real dude, and they brought in 2 transfers from Colorado's offensive line last season to be their tackles. So we know how Oregon did against those guys. Not great. But they're going to just lean heavy on the run. And that's exactly what we come to expect from an Oregon State team. And I don't think it's going to be that different. And we asked Jeff Bossa and Keon Ware-Hudson, and I think we asked Bryce Betcher as well. And they all kind of came to the conclusion, like, yeah, it's a little different because, their offensive coordinator is not there from a year ago. But it's, still wrinkles of the same system where it's going to be a lot of 12, maybe 13 personnel. They're going to try to run the ball. And, that's been a strength of Oregon's this year. Obviously, no Ashton Genty here. We're not talking about that. But last year was also a strength, and Oregon did really well against Oregon State last year in terms of just stopping the run. And that was with Damian Martinez and a more talented offensive line. So, like Eric said, this is an Oregon team that is vastly superior on paper, just like they were against Boise State and just like they were against Idaho. Defensively, I think Oregon State's pretty good, but again, they're a whole new roster, and they got a lot of guys that are just like getting playing time for like the first time at this level in their career. There's just like a lot of guys there, and they are not the same defensively as they were last year, because that was kind of like their bread and butter.
Yeah, I think the best way to sum this up is like on both sides of the ball, very similar philosophies and scheme to what we've seen the past 2 years, but completely different personnel. And defensively, I think they have 10 true freshmen or redshirt freshmen on their 2 deep. Like it's a very young group. Some of those players look like good players. Like one of their inside linebackers, Melvin Jordan, maybe. I apologies for not getting all the names, but like he looks like a guy who's going to be a really productive player for them. They've got great size at safety, and that's kind of maybe their more experienced place. I think Jaden Robinson's been there a couple of years. Skylar Thomas was a guy who I think they were really high on in 22, and he tore his ACL or some sort of season-ending injury in 23, but now he's back and he looks good. So I think the secondary is a strength for them. I think the front is considered to be kind of the question mark. And that, to me, becomes the most kind of obvious storyline here of how does this Oregon State defensive front with a lot of young players go up against this Oregon offensive line, which has been really pretty bad through 2 weeks. And the undoubted kind of like big question mark in this entire team is how good is this offensive line? And it goes against the defensive line for Oregon State that's also unproven. And so I'm going to be very fascinated to kind of watch how, because unlike Boise State, which had Hassanen, who was like a guy we knew was going to be a good player, a guy we knew had
a real guy,
like NFL talent. I know Thomas Collins, we talked about it on the other day, like he's their number 2 ranked PFF defensive lineman in the country. He's a redshirt freshman defensive lineman. What is he actually? Like, how good is he actually? You know what I mean? Like, these are the questions I have.
Yeah, I was going to get into that because Collins grades really well on PFF, but so Oregon State has 32 total pressures this year by PFF, which I think they do a good job of breaking down pressures by people. I think that's actually one of the few stats that they do a good job with. They have 32 on the season, and 21 of them came against Idaho State, so that's well more than half. And Collins is credited with 8 total pressures this year, which is pretty good. That's a good number to have. And
Oh, yeah.
7 of them came against Idaho State. So when asking like what type of player he is, that's very, 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 very fair of a question, because I don't know. Like, I think he's obviously, redshirt freshman, young, talented, and a guy who could potentially, bring some issues to Oregon's offensive line, because, well, a lot of people have brought some problems to Oregon's offensive line, but I don't know. They need, like, Oregon State, like, the secondary has been something in the last few years where they've had a lot of like actual NFL talent or high level college football talent.
Yeah.
They don't have the same type of talent in the back end. So if Oregon can establish the run, which is something that was way better against Boise State, but something that was really dreadful against Idaho, if they can establish the run and meet somewhere probably in the higher end of what the Boise State game looked like, I think that Oregon can cover this 16-point spread. But it's just going to be like, the problem is I'm going into this game and it's like, all right, here it is again. Like, what do I really think is going to happen? Because it's been the same story every week. And it's like, well, if they just do this and this, they should win by a lot. And then they just don't do basically either thing. So again, the strategy is still the same. It's establish the run, get people to kind of stack the box and try to stop Jordan James, Noah Whittington, or whoever's in the backfield. And then, look for Tez, look for Evan Stewart, look for Trayshawn Holden. But you got to establish the run first, and that all starts with the offensive line and just their communication and their execution up front, which hasn't been great, obviously, for the last 2 weeks. So, again, same story, different week. I do think that, like you said, Eric, like Boise State's defense, I think their top-end talent was much, much better than Oregon State's top-end talent.
It's really just feels like if Oregon plays a clean game, they should be able to win and maybe win somewhat convincingly. I want to certainly include the fact that Corvallis is a really hard place to play. Their fans are going to be really motivated to be involved in this game because, whether or not it's totally based in reality, the sense is that Oregon's to fault for their demise in terms of the conference realignment. And again, I think there's some validity there in terms of like, hey, Oregon's in a conference that Oregon State wishes they could be in. So there's some sort of sense of that. But I also think if you really peel back the layers, there's reasons to kind of say that this was really just unfortunate circumstances, and Oregon probably isn't directly to blame for all this or didn't pull the strings to make this happen. But regardless of what the reality is, perception in Corvallis is going to be these are the guys that not only try to beat us on the field, but have tried to like beat us off of it and kind of ruin our standing as a program. And I think that environment is going to be crazy. Can Oregon actually like handle that, especially on offense with that offensive line going into their first real road, like their first road environment period, but certainly their first hostile environment of the season? Like that should be something you're considering and talking about. Because if this was played like in a empty stadium, I think Oregon could torch this team if they played at their best. But I also know that the environment is going to play a role here, and there's no question in my mind that could impact things, just like we saw it impact things in 2022, where there was a whole bunch of weird stuff that happened with special teams. The defense just kind of lost its kind of ability to stop anything on the ground. So, I think there's reasons to be optimistic if you're supporting Oregon, but there's also reasons to go, like, if they play the way they've been playing the last 2 weeks and the road environment adds another obstacle, that like this could get really dicey once again. And then just the last thing I wanted to touch on for me is kind of when Oregon's defense is on the field, I'll be really curious to see, because I'm pretty confident Oregon's defensive front is really strong. Like I know Genty had great stats last week. I know there seems to be a sense in the fan base that the defensive line hasn't gotten enough pressure. I disagree. But
yeah, they got plenty of pressure, man. They are there.
But there's like a sense that like, okay, this is going to be kind of where the game's determined. And I really do feel confident that defensive line for Oregon should be able to hold up against Oregon State. And if they take away the run game, because I think Jam Griffin and I think Anthony Hankerson are good backs, I haven't seen anything that leads me to believe they're game-changing backs like an Ashton Genty, who a couple of those runs where he ran through players that were actually well-positioned. He's just a more physically like Jeff Bossa. I don't expect to get plowed through 3 or 4 times this game. I don't expect Derek Harmon to miss 2 or 3 tackles in open space because the running backs are those kind of players. And so, like, if you take away that run game, I'm really skeptical of Oregon State's ability to throw the ball with the talent they have at receiver. And they're kind of what we've seen so far from McCoy, who I agree, Jared, I think there's some things he does really well, but I'm not convinced he's ready to take over a game in this magnitude against the defensive talent that Oregon has. So, like, I guess just to kind of wrap up my thought process, because I was just running through all this, like, if the offense plays like even a B+ game, they could create some separation, because I'm not convinced Oregon State has the dogs to keep up with them on that side. And I know there's going to be Beaver fans who totally disagree, and maybe I'll look crazy for thinking this, and I've estimated and underestimated, certain parts of this game. But I seem to think that Oregon's offensive or defensive front's pretty damn good, and I'm a little bit skeptical Oregon State can do what it's been doing the last couple of games, where they've averaged like 300 yards on the ground.
Yeah, no, it's like I was talking about earlier, where it's the same game plan for Oregon offensively. It's the same game plan for Oregon defensively as going into Boise State. It's like, try to eliminate the run. And, I thought Oregon did a really good job against Genty. It's just that he got plenty of opportunities. And if you think about it, his 70-yard touchdown run comes off of a direct result of an Oregon offensive miscue in the Patrick Herbert fumble. Like, if they don't fumble that ball, and let's say they just get a field goal, obviously there's no telling that Genty wouldn't have had an 85-yard touchdown or something like that. But that direct play eliminates that direct play from Genty, and all of a sudden his yards go from whatever it was, like almost 200 to $130, which is pretty darn good against one of the best running backs in the country. And, I'm with you. Like, I think this defensive line is really damn good. I thought they did a really good job against Genty for the most part. The explosive plays happened, but Jam Griffin.
And Jared, sorry. The explosive plays happened, I don't even think because of the defensive line. There were some run fits that were bad by the linebackers and the safeties that led to those, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, and if Oregon can correct that, and even still, when Oregon had good run fits, it was just Genty was like, I don't care. I'm gonna bowl over everybody or break tackles. And for as much as I like Hankerson and Jam Griffin, but Jam Griffin all-time name, they're just not Ash and Genty. And this offensive line is not as good as Boise State's offensive line, I don't think, in my opinion. I think they're pretty good. And I think that the Colorado transfers have actually been better than I think people anticipated. But they've also they haven't faced a defensive line like this. Like, I was talking about pressures earlier. Oregon has 45 of them. Derek Harmon has 13 pressures this year. 13 already. Jordan Birch, 11. Then you go down and it's Jamari Caldwell with 6. Like, that's 3 of your starters with nearly 30 of the 45 total pressures on the year. So that's a pretty good defensive line, and I think that they're going to be able to get in the backfield, or at least make life, kind of miserable for Jam and Hankerson, and on the ground for Oregon State. But it's the same idea. Stop the run, first and second down, force them into third and long. I don't know if Darius Clemens is playing this week. He hasn't played the first 2 weeks. He was a transfer from Michigan, originally a Pacific Northwest kid, 4-star recruit. I think he's just a redshirt freshman. He hasn't played the first 2 weeks. I have to go talk to a couple of my friends who run the Oregon State beat to see if he's playing. But if he plays, that might help their downfield game, because he is a talented kid. But at the same time, like we were just talking about with Oregon's injuries, it takes time to get adjusted back to playing actual real life football. So if he plays, that certainly helps, but there's nobody on the outside who is concerning if you're Oregon State's defense. Like, if you're Jabbar Muhammad, you had 2 interceptions last year against Oregon State at Oregon State with a significantly better receiving core, and I think maybe a better quarterback. I don't know about DJ, but a better system for the guy and better wide receivers around him. So I think if you're Oregon's secondary, just like you played last week against Boise State, I think you feel confident in that matchup. It's just about stopping the run on first and second down, forcing him to third and long. Same game plan.
And for what it's worth, Jake indicated there hasn't been much of an update on Clemens, and sort of seemed like he wasn't sure he was going to be, or very confident he'd be available either. So I wouldn't count on, kind of maybe similar to like us being like, I don't know if Gary Bryant's going to play. It doesn't feel like it. Maybe that's kind of where they're at with Clemens. I'm not sure if it's quite the same thing, but it didn't seem like there was like an overwhelming sense of like, oh yeah, he's looking playing, he's looking better and look like he's going to play.
Yeah. Same game plan. It's been the same game plan for 2 weeks now a third week. So we'll see if this is the magical one that finally everything clicks into place and starts working for Oregon's offense and defense. But I think that's going to be it for us, right?
I got nothing else. Nothing else over here. Just hoping, and we'll get into our predictions tomorrow of what we think will happen, but just hoping to see a cleaner game from the Ducks. I think if they play a clean game, you won't be sweating in the fourth quarter, but we'll see.
Yeah. Like execution is ultimately what it probably comes down to. And it's what it came down to against Idaho and Boise State. So that'll do it for us on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Again, Oregon State, 12:30, September 14th on Fox. I think Jason Benetti's on the call, so that's going to be great for those who are watching from home. Love Jason Benetti. Great dude. But yeah, that'll do it for us on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you all for listening. Please leave a 5-star review wherever you guys listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, whatever the case is. That'd be greatly appreciated from all of us here at duckterritory.com. So for Erik Skopil, I'm Jared Mack. Thank you all for listening.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.